Let's talk about one of the internet's most fascinating and maybe most terrifying mysteries. It's a story that started way back on some old forum, but it ended up asking some really big questions about our own future. So imagine you're just browsing online, minding your own business, and you see this. Just a stark, super ominous warning from a total stranger. It's the kind of thing you'd probably just scroll past, right? Well, that is until things he talked about actually start happening. And that's really the big question, isn't it? The person who wrote this claimed to have a point of view that literally no one else on the planet could have. Why? Well, because he said he'd already seen our future. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Our story kicks off back in the year 2000. The internet was a totally different world then. A brand new user shows up, and the name he used, well, it would become an absolute legend. This was the name John Titor, and his claim was just out there. He wasn't just some guy saying he could time travel. He said he was a soldier, sent back from a pretty bleak, war-torn future on a very specific mission to get his hands on an old IBM computer. And of course, people just laughed it off. I mean, what would you do? This was the early 2000s internet. It felt like a classic prank. The forums were flooded with people asking for winning lottery numbers, stock tips, you know the drill. They were all just waiting for the punchline. But that punchline never came. See, instead of a punchline, John Titor started doing something else entirely. He started making predictions. And this is where the story goes from being a funny internet prank to something a whole lot weirder. Now, at first, his warnings were kind of vague, but then they started to get weirdly specific. He was talking about growing conflict in the Middle East, serious civil unrest brewing in America. He even mentioned breakthroughs at places like the CERN laboratory. All stuff that sounded pretty far-fetched back in 2000.
And then you could feel the whole mood on the forums start to change. As real-world events began to eerily mirror what he was posting about, the jokes just kind of dried up. A small group of followers started asking themselves, wait a minute, what if this guy isn't kidding?
But to prove he was legit, Titor didn't just stop at predictions. He did something even crazier. He posted the actual blueprints for his time machine. He laid it all out. A machine that uses these two tiny black holes, he called them microsingularities, to basically create a bubble of warped gravity. He even provided diagrams and super detailed technical descriptions of how it all supposedly worked. And here's the wild part. It sounded like pure science fiction, but when actual physicists took a look at his posts, they were kind of stunned. His ideas, things like using spinning black holes to bend spacetime, they didn't actually violate any of our known laws of physics. It wasn't proven, sure, but it wasn't impossible either. It was strangely plausible. So as his online legend grew, Titor's messages started to get more serious, more urgent. He had one last really chilling message to give everyone before his time here was over. This was his main point. He wasn't just calling out single events anymore. He was describing a whole pattern, a cycle of history he claimed we were doomed to go through all over again, only this time with much, much higher stakes. So after 4 months of answering thousands of questions and sharing these glimpses of his world, in March of 2001, he announced he was done. His mission, he said, was complete. And just like that, poof, he was gone. The account went dark. John Titor vanished from the internet just as suddenly as he'd shown up, leaving this massive digital trail of predictions, blueprints, and a whole lot of questions. But the story doesn't even stop there. Years after he disappeared, this photo popped up online, supposedly from Titor's collection. It shows a bridge collapsing into a river, a scene that looks almost identical to a real bridge collapse that happened in 2007, a full 4 years after he logged off for good. So what on earth are we supposed to make of all this? For more than 20 years, people have been fighting over that exact question, and pretty much everyone falls into one of two camps. And honestly, both sides have good points. The believers will tell you, look at the predictions that came true. The science actually holds up. And he vanished into thin air. But the skeptics say, hold on, those predictions were so vague you could make them fit anything. The science was just clever speculation, and the guy probably just got bored and stopped logging on. But no matter what you believe, his impact is just undeniable. To this day, there are entire online communities dedicated to poring over his old posts, dissecting every single word, trying to finally solve the puzzle of John Titor. And that really brings us to the final question. Was this guy a genuine prophet from a future that we're actually living through right now? A warning we didn't take seriously? Or was this whole thing just the most creative, the most elaborate, and maybe the best ghost story ever told on the internet? The answer is still out there.